Okay. On Tuesday, President Trump announced plans for the Golden Dome Missile Defense Shield, a defense program that would use a system of satellites to locate and stop missiles. The project is projected to cost $175 million and would be operating by 2029, according to the Trump administration. But what do our allies and enemies abroad think about this proposed missile defense system? To discuss, we welcome back to the show Richard Stoll, the Albert Thomas Emeritus Professor of Political Science at Rice University. And if you'd like to join the conversation and have questions for us about this topic, give us a call now. It's 713-440-8870. You can also text or email us at talk@hellohouston.org. Hello there, Rick.
Hello.
Okay. The first thing that came to mind when I heard about this defense was I go way back because I'm old enough to remember, and I go to Reagan's Star Wars plan, and people mocked it, and people said it was impossible and it couldn't be done. I don't know whatever ended up happening with it. I don't think we have the technology, but here we are again. It seems very similar. Are we on the same path with it?
Yes, the same path. The technology that we're talking about now is extremely different from what the Reagan administration would have to deal with. But the concept is the same, which is we want to find a way to protect the American people. The arsenals of our potential opponents are large enough to devastate the United States. So let's do something to protect them.
Israel has the Iron Dome, which seems to be a prototype of what we're talking about here. Israel is so much smaller than we are. I mean, we even talk about their airport security because they have one international airport, basically. So they have a different way they can approach these things. Size, scope of this, is this feasible?
Well, the Israelis have a much smaller area to protect, as you pointed out. But that's the good news from Israel's point of view. The bad news is that they have to worry about weapons being launched from a very much shorter distance away than we do, which means a much shorter warning time for them to respond, to do something. So, yeah, it's the same idea. It's not clear if we had a quote-unquote reasonably effective system, it might work better to protect our people than the Israeli system does to protect their people.
Now, during the Reagan administration, this was discussed back then, the Strategic Defense Initiative, I recall that the technology just didn't seem to be there. The idea was we have to develop the technology. Do we have the technology to do this? What is the technology? Are we talking about ray guns? Are we talking about bullets shooting down bullets? What is it?
Well, it's not clear to me what is in Trump's mind for the technology. I think it would, of course, include like missiles shooting down missiles, but we could have ray things and other stuff like that. The bottom line is, how effective would it be? Because if you're a student in the class and you get 85 out of 100 on your midterm exam, that's pretty good. You know, you might wish to do better. That's pretty good. If you have a defensive system that shoots down 85 of the 100 attacking missiles, that's not very good. Just to put a little context to it, if a single megaton landed inside the loop between the blast and other stuff, it would kill at least 50% of the people inside the loop. If it led to firestorms, which is very possible, then basically everyone inside the loop would be killed from this 1 megaton blast. Currently, the Russians have about 700 megatons. The Chinese have a smaller number of megatons but have 600 warheads. So 85 out of 100 is a reasonable grade in a class. It doesn't begin to cut it in terms of defending against a nuclear attack.
So you mentioned China, you mentioned the Soviet Union, but since Reagan's time, there are other actors out there. There's North Korea out there. Has the strategy changed in any way as a result of these new actors having nuclear weapons?
I think probably the basics have not changed. The details have. In other words, somewhere in the bowels of the U.S. government, is a list of targets in North Korea to hit if they should try to attack us, which didn't exist 20 years ago, that kind of thing. But conceptually, we're talking about the same stuff, but the more countries that have nuclear weapons that we need to worry about, we don't worry about the British, we don't worry about the French, but the more countries you have to worry about, it just complicates the problem because you've not only got the technical side of things, how effective would your systems be, but what is it that might lead a country to do this? You know, if some weird person becomes in charge of one of these countries, would they just say, let's go ahead and do it? So the more countries that have these weapons, the more complicated it becomes for the U.S.
So let me ask then about the whole since foreign policy is much more in your realm than technology. Does this work as a deterrent? Is that kind of the plan? We show them that we have this, so your warheads are not going to be effective against us, so now sit down and talk to us. Is that the overall plan?
Well, let me respond as an academic typically does. Well, maybe. But let me...
Well, thank you for that answer.
On the one hand, if countries believe that you know, a nuclear strike, any nuclear strike that they would take against the U.S. won't work, then maybe they would say, well, one, let's not do that. Two, maybe we should become nicer for towards the United States. On the other hand, if it also occurs to them that, well, if they believe in a nuclear war, they could get away with it. It wouldn't hurt them very much. Maybe it would encourage them to start a nuclear war. Mm-hmm. And the other countries need to deal with that. And maybe some of the things they might do to deal with that would not be things that we would like.
Could it lead to the development of new warheads, new ways, new weaponry? Right. Because now okay, we can't send our missile, but we can do this and that. Yeah. Does it create a new arms race?
It very well could. And part of what might happen, for example, is a country might say, well, if the U.S. does this, we won't have a good way to deliver nuclear weapons. But you know what would work? Biological weapons. You know, we just open up we hire someone to fly to Houston, go to the middle of downtown and open up a container or something like that. So it could conceivably make countries think about non-nuclear weapons that would cause mass destruction in the United States that maybe we are not ever going to be equipped to deal with.
Living downtown, I'm getting really tired of your examples. This isn't sounding good. But then also it brings to mind then, should we not be trying, though, to diffuse situations that could come our way? If we can find the technology and the ability to protect ourselves this way, why not do it? What's the other side of this argument?
Well, as I say, I think there's two arguments in opposition that have to be considered. You may still decide to go. The first is, would it provoke someone to go and do something before we have these systems fully in place? Okay. Number two, would they presume, imagine, for example, we learned this morning that Russia would in 5 years have a great system. Would we conclude, well, if that happens, then this Putin dude is going to start to do some really bad stuff. So we need to act against him now. Would other countries make that same argument about the United States? Mm-hmm. We need to come after them before they have this system in place.
So it could provoke a nuclear war.
In principle, yeah. I'm not saying it would, but it's certainly an argument that we have to think about.
The number here is 713-440-8870. If you have a thought, opinion, want to share with us, James from Kingwood is on the line. Rick, you're going to have to put on your headphones to hear James. James, take it away.
Thanks a lot. When I was in college, we studied Reagan's plan. And we discovered that I'm getting backbeat. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think probably because you have your radio on or something. There's a little bit of a delay. So.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem. So in college, you studied Reagan's plan.
Right. And what we discussed was, I was in ROTC at the time. What we discussed was that
James, I'm going to have to let the
nuclear-
call go for a minute now. If you could call us back and try and get a better connection, because the pauses are not going to help us there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what he has to say
Yeah.
about that, studying the plan. Yeah.
And if you have an opinion, give us a call, 713-440-8870. I'm curious, though, when you look at what's going on then with foreign policy across the board in this administration right now, and the idea that, yes, we need something like this, I think is speaking to the bigger picture of where we are with other countries on this planet.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, you look around at Russia, at China, on a smaller scale, North Korea, and say, these are countries that think bad thoughts about us. While we, of course, would never start a nuclear war, we're not that kind of country, one of those countries might. And so we owe it to the American people to build systems that would be able to protect them from that. So it's not a crazy argument. As I say, there are some potential implications, leaving aside would it really work, but beyond that, even if it did work, would that create some negative things? But it's something we should be at least thinking about.
I have a note here that our producers heard from James when he had first called in, and his question was going to be, after you shoot down the missiles, doesn't it leave the radiation anyway? True or false? So what happens to all the fallout, I guess?
Yeah. Well, it depends on, these things, we're getting into technical things that, as a political scientist, are not my biggest thing. But it depends on whether the act of shooting this thing down or blowing it up would trigger the nuclear weapon itself. As far as I know, that doesn't necessarily happen. Okay, number one. Number two, if you manage to explode this thing 200 miles away from Houston, even if there was a nuclear explosion, that would be better for us in Houston than if it actually landed in Houston.
Right. Do we know the success of the Iron Dome? And by success, I mean, we have seen, because of what's going on in Gaza right now, we've heard about this Iron Dome. We hear it gets these missiles out of the sky and stuff. But do we know of problems they've had, misfirings, maybe misidentifying something that wasn't actually a missile, things like that? And are there lessons we can take from that in preparing our own?
Well, at least at my level, since I don't have a clearance, I don't know. I mean, we know just from sort of looking that they have not suffered a significant attack from these kinds of systems. But how much of that was due to the presence of the Iron Dome versus, well, we know we're bad guys in the Middle East. We know if we attack Israel, they will come after us in such a way it'll be a disaster. So we're not going to try. So is it the systems they have in place, or is it that countries don't really want to attack Israel, or do they worry about the consequences, independent of Iron Dome?
And I also still worry about that price tag of $175 million.
Yeah,
Sounds like a bargain.
And that raises an interesting question, because the Congressional Budget Office put out a report a couple of months ago, a memo that was sent to members of Congress. It estimated the cost to be anywhere from $264 million to $542 million, I think. Billion, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
These numbers are just right.
Yes.
So we're talking about anywhere from $250 billion to $500 billion, as opposed to the $175 million.
Which does seem rather cheap.
Yeah, and I understand it's difficult. You're developing technology. It's difficult to pinpoint. It depends on launch costs, everything else. But is $175 million realistic? And 2029 is when when the president says this could start to be rolled out. Is that realistic?
I think you could start to roll out something of a system that early. To what extent you could sort of, build the entire system, I don't know. Trump says $175 billion over 3 years. As you mentioned, the Congressional Budget Office says somewhere between 161 and 542 billion. Mm-hmm. I think there's a an amount of uncertainty here. And of course, if I were trying to promote this, I would come up with a figure that wasn't crazy, but was at the lower end of the scale. I mean, again, you could say, well, the CBO says it could only be 161 billion. What's the big deal? Again, the U.S. defense budget last year was 884 billion. So in that context, if it's really only 161 billion to protect the American people, this sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, we will learn more over the years, over actually this administration, as we see where this program goes, how much of it is serious and how much of it is maybe just chatter. But it looks like it may be moving forward. Thank you very much. Richard Stoll is the Albert Thomas Emeritus Professor of Political Science at Rice University. Thanks for always joining us.
Thank you.